Thank you so much, and yeah, excited to dive into this topic with you all. So here's on to cultivating some genetic resistance. But before we can start cultivating these modes of genetic resistance, we need to first have this collective understanding together of what genetic difference is and what is at stake for those who may be constructed as genetically different. So what I'm about to say is going to be a bit controversial maybe to some, but I don't really care. As a mutant is not an actual biological phenomenon. Having mutations is what is a biological phenomenon, which proves actually to be essential for the continuation of life on our planet. However, being a mutant itself is a social construction of biological difference. If we were to label a mutant as anyone with a mutation, we are all technically mutants. We are all genetically different, unless there are any identical twins in the room right now. You are genetically the same, to each other only, hopefully, maybe not. Mutants that are declared mutant, though, when meeting particular conditions that are socially and culturally constructed, typically by either doctors or scientists, but we also have the X-Men, so Hollywood as well. The first most commonly known mutant is the one that is literally made by the hands of scientists in the laboratory, which is known as a genetically modified organism. And the second mutant, which is emerging more and is the one that I will talk about the most today, is the mutant that was diagnosed. Once again, so we are all mutants, and we all have genetically differences and different types of genetic mutations. Also, your genome is mutating throughout your entire lifespan, whether you like it or not. It's not something pure that remains unchanged. If you've ever gotten a freckle, congratulations, you've been mutated by the radiation of the sun. And so, although freckles are not nearly as cool as being mutated maybe by a radioactive spider and becoming Spider-Man, we are all in this constant state of gathering mutations and changing. Also, the opposite of what a mutant is not what we think of as the normal here. In science, it's called the wild type, or in health, the opposite of a mutant is actually the non-pathogenic, or what is clinically not significant. So the insignificance is for anyone who's not a medical mutant. Congratulations, you are insignificant in the best way, I guess. But wild type in this context means that this genotype or phenotype or gene itself is believed to be predominant in the so-called natural population. And I say natural with a heavy emphasis on destabilizing that word because nature itself is also a construct. And I bring up being a mutant here and talking about cultivating genetic resistance because it turns out I am in fact a mutant, apparently. Unfortunately, I was not bit by a radioactive spider. It was not just the sun's rays that gave me a freckle, and I was not genetically modified in a laboratory, despite the fact that I was made in a facility. But we will get to that story later on in this talk. But as proof, here's the picture of my German diagnostics report. I also have one in English from the US, since I was diagnosed shortly after my 18th birthday when I lived in the United States. And I have censored some of the information because it's my personal medical records, and don't want to reveal all my cards yet, and also because my doctor's name is on here, but most importantly because the exact kind of information about my genetic difference is not only revealing data about myself, but about my entire family. So I do not have the right to kind of reveal all my cards about their privacy as well. I can tell you, though, that I have a pretty rare variant of a genetic mutation on one allele of my BRCA1 gene. This mutation is also the most serious kind of mutation that you can have on, or one of them that you can have on this gene, because it's been diagnosed, as you can see, as a class 5 pathogen by the International Agency for Cancer Research, which is the highest classification, meaning that I have over 99% pathogenic disease-causing capabilities of this mutation in me. They can't say 100% because science can never be 100% sure, but it might as well. So this mutation means, and these are layman's terms, is that my body cannot properly read the instructions in my DNA to make what is called a tumor suppression protein, causing me to have a complete loss of function of my body's ability to make any tumor suppression proteins using this genetic information. Now, if you know anything about the BRCA1 gene, it is a gene that encodes for tumor suppression proteins that are supposed to be used in particular kinds of tissues in your body to stop the cells from going rogue and making cancer. And also to check the DNA of these cells in these tissues like making sure they don't have any errors in them that could potentially become cancer. These types of tissues that this gene makes these proteins in are breast tissue, pancreatic tissue, the ovaries, the tissue in the fallopian tubes, prostate tissue, lymphatic tissue, hematological tissue, so your blood, and the peritoneum, which is the lining of your organs in your abdomen. So if you have a loss of function for this gene, you need to only inherit one mutant copy of it from one parent, so it's quite easy to get the loss of function, unfortunately. And you can also get problems where you'll develop all kinds of cancers in these tissues throughout your lifetime because they need this gene to work in order to make the correct tumor suppression protein. And my diagnostic is kind of this indicator that we've really entered in healthcare. The fact that I'm being diagnosed with a disease potential versus an actual disease, we've entered this place of, we're in the genomic era, where the body is not just the body that a doctor sees with symptoms for diagnosis, but the body has now become the genetic body. So the potential of diagnoses that could possibly exist are now what doctors are evaluating. And also disease identities now are being expanded beyond just what symptoms are being shown, but actually the possibility of symptoms that could emerge, whether they're there or not. And so when doctors are looking at someone like me, I am not only someone who does not have breast cancer or any cancer, but I am someone who has cancer at the same time, which is a weird place to be, especially when you do not yet have cancer. And they treat me as if I'm already a cancer patient. I have to go through the same sort of treatment plans, surgeries, hormone therapies, screenings as someone who does have cancer, when I don't. So it's this weird duality. And I'm probably maybe one of the first people in this thing, because the BRCA genes are some of the ones that we have most extensively mapped out with their disease-causing potential. But I hate to be the bearer of bad news. We all have genes that are going to make us sick at the end of the day. So we're all going to join my place in having to deal with this about being both sick and not sick at the same time. However, I told you I don't have cancer, but you must be wondering if there were any sort of indicators in my life to cause me to get tested, because no one would test someone genetically for no reason, in theory. Insurance wouldn't cover that. That doesn't make any sense. But I had no health problems up until 18. However, my mother got cancer when I was a teenager. When I was around 15, 16 years old, my mother got breast cancer. And I don't know if anyone else here has had a sick parent growing up, but it kind of really sucks. Because not only do you have a sick parent, but then your sick parent finds out that they have a messed up gene that caused it, and then suddenly your sick parent is following you around the house, telling you if you don't go get tested when you turn 18, they're going to ground you. And then they drive you to a doctor's office. The good news is my mom is still alive to hound me to go to the doctor's appointments, which is nice of her. However, her mom and her mom's mom were not so lucky. They both died of cancer. And actually looking at my family tree, most of my family has died of cancer. And like so many to the point that my personal geneticist has like been quite impressed at the number of people who have died from cancer. And when I was 18 and I got tested and I started doing all these screenings, I was living in the United States, which caused me to end up writing this article for Nautilus magazine, because I found out when I went to these screenings, my health insurance told me that they would only cover all of these preventative treatment plans as long as I did not have cancer. The moment that I had cancer, they did not have to cover it because it was a pre-existing condition, when in fact it's the condition of my existence because it's my genes. To which the US has a Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act that was passed in 2008 when genetic testing first started to make prominence in politics. However, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008 only protects you against discrimination from genetic difference as long as you are not having symptoms of said genetic difference. So the moment that you have symptoms of genetic difference, you can be totally discriminated against. What's supposed to come in is Obamacare, that says you can't discriminate against pre-existing conditions. However, this is a weird area of US politics, and healthcare companies don't really care. And to be honest, no one should have to hire a lawyer when they get cancer to sue their insurance to pay for said cancer treatments. It's a bit weird. But my mom and I are not alone in being mutants. So Angelina Jolie, pretty good company, also a mutant, who has come out about being public about her genetic diagnosis, and her mom's death from cancer, but it inspired such a large movement of genetic testing, which has been called the Angelina effect. However, when my mom got tested, this had nothing to do with Angelina Jolie. My mom was tested because she is ethnically Ashkenazi Jewish, which also makes me ethnically Ashkenazi Jewish. And in the United States in particular, Ashkenazi Jews are medically viewed as genetically suspicious for being the predominant population characters of BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations. However, this is actually not an accurate assessment and brings up an important point that I would like to make before continuing this talk about genetics, given the context of presenting this talk also in Germany, where I think these issues are also very relevant. Eugenics are very much a giant part of modern-day medicine. It contributes largely to the systemic racism in medicine today, and on top of already existing sexism in medicine, which I will get to later. There are many false notions about race and genetics in medicine, which make certain individuals susceptible to systemic medicalized violence and cause others to be unable to get access to healthcare, which results in people dying. The BRCA1 mutation that I am suspected of having is found in considerable population frequencies, not only in Ashkenazi Jews, but also in populations throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. However, in the United States, studies as old as 2008 and as recent as 2021 have acknowledged that Black and Hispanic women are underdiagnosed for these genetic syndromes. Also, in the United States, Black women in particular, the American Cancer Society reports that they are the most likely to die of breast cancer in the United States than any other ethnic group, at a whopping 40% higher death rates than white women. And this racism is so overwhelmingly apparent, as well as sexism in these genetic issues. When you look at the media that emerges around the term previvor, which is for people who are diagnosed with the precondition of having cancer, the majority of the people with the previvor narrative are white, heteronormative, have very normative body types, very feminine, and of course use pink everywhere. And I'm not hating on the previvor term. People have found a community that is wonderful, that is great, but it perpetuates this continuing problem in breast cancer that already exists, which is that the disease is heavily based in gender deceptions with sexism, and that causes women to lose their lives, and also for breast cancer to not be taken as seriously as it could be. And specifically with genetic mutations like mine, as I told you, it's also pancreatic cancer, it's prostate cancer, it's the lining of my abdomen. These are all issues that have nothing to do with any sort of reproductive organ. But breast cancer is a disease that is depicted in the media as a direct attack on cultural and social values of femininity and gendered notions of reproductive potential. The American Cancer Society in particular has adopted a program where survivors and surviving was all formulated around emphasizing that mastectomies are not a handicap, but a condition that they can overcome given the right attitude, clothes, and prosthesis. So if you can maintain your womanhood, good for you, you really beat the cancer. And there are also many other wonderful activists and scholars who have spoken out about these issues, including Audre Lorde, who has written immensely on the topic of prosthesis, her own queerness, her breast cancer, and the racism she has faced in the book The Cancer Journals, which I highly recommend everyone to go take a look at after the talk. And so this caused me to start researching my own about breast cancer and the history of breast cancer, and as I was starting to move throughout the world and live in different places, I started seeing how breast cancer and its treatment itself has mutated as well in different countries. And also coming up and going back to this idea of being a mutant with this notion of disease identity is a bit different than just having a disease. So when we think of mutants, we think of this multiplicity, like literally the X-Men are the X-Men, not the X-Man. There's multiple mutants, there's multiple subjectivities, they each have their own power. And this is the idea that Jason Zingsham has brought up in his mutational identity theory, that when you look at a mutant, you're not just looking at one individual, but you're looking at identity in terms of this larger multiplicity and lineage, and it has a history, so there's a time component to it. And so when I started this project, I was in Russia, doing research because I thought it would be interesting in Russia. So I applied to do a residency at Itmo University's Art and Science Center, and boy, was I right, it was super interesting. Vladimir Putin has legally declared by stating, as part of the chemical security strategy, that all Russian genetic information is a bioweapon, which is fun, because an American poking around and asking questions did not go over as well as anyone can imagine. So, especially because I was also asking questions about queer experience there. But I met some really lovely researchers who talked to me, like Dr. Anastasia Neveskunskaya, who's in the image on the side. And she told me that women with breast cancer, when they live in small villages in Russia, they actually have no access to healthcare at all for cancer, because most of the healthcare in Russia is geared around pro-baby strategies. So there's definitely an obstetric person to help you deliver a baby, but no gynecological oncologist if you get breast cancer. You have to go to the big cities like Yekaterinburg or St. Petersburg or Moscow to get treatment. And so genetic testing is not widespread, and also the laws are so convoluted that most geneticists don't know what to do. And I spoke to several geneticists at the OncoAtlas company based in Moscow, and they expressed that they were very concerned because they actually don't legally know what to do when testing people because it's a bioweapon, apparently. So then I left Russia because they invaded Ukraine, and I ended up taking this project to Finland. And I found out Finland also is really interesting about genetic information because they're one of the leading members in the EU for the Horizons 2020 program Beyond 1 Million Genomes. And Finland has a very different experience of this, especially because they have such a profound founder's effect in their population that their genetic data cannot be counted in world population data. And also, breast cancer is one of the leading killers of people in Finland, which I did not know. And they have their own unique mutations for breast cancer that other populations around the world do not have. But I talked to Dr. Kristiina Atomaki, who's the leading researcher in this. Is one of the leading researchers in breast cancer research in Finland. And she explained to me that Finland is working on trying to get the EU to start biobanking, which has both pros and cons. So now you're having your genetic information located in a biobank, which then is easily shareable. However, Germany, this is very illegal because we have strict privacy laws, and this can be a violation of privacy. But in Finland, this makes sense because healthcare is socialized. Everyone gets the treatment regardless. There's no insurance companies preying on anyone there. So after traveling around the world and traumatizing myself a bit, and finding out every country lacks this way to deal with these genetic issues and being a mutant, I decided to seek out ways to cultivate my own resistance against these issues. And so I've reflected on my approach and have found that Amy Hamarai and Kelly Fritch's Technoscience Manifesto is a perfect articulation of my approach. So their manifesto builds off their individual academic bodies of work in disability studies, but also sets out to address the inherent problem of ableist failures in imagination, which is a term coined by Alison Kafer that exists globally. And Fritch best puts this into words by stating, in order to imagine disability differently, we need to understand how neoliberal hegemonic social imagination, key processes that create good disabled and able-bodied neoliberal subjects, works to curtail its perceived to have a desirable body. And in order to desire disability differently, we must begin with marginal heterotrophic imaginations, where disability is not something to overcome, but rather a part of life worth living. And so CRIB Technoscience Manifesto asserts that disabled people are not actually not just users in user experience, I think, as we often think about. I mean, we talk about disability and accessibility with barrier-free. I mean, it's literally written on the door entering this building whether or not it's barrier-free. So we think of a disabled person as the user to this building. Instead, CRIB Technoscience asserts that disabled people are the expert makers and designers of everyday life, that they are the ones who should be designing and making everyday life, not the users of it. And within that, disability is not a difference that must be placated by this pandering of progressive generosity, which honestly, putting these labels on the door is the bare minimum one can do in reality. Disabled people do not have special needs because they are disabled, and it is not just a kindness to make accommodations for them, but just the bare minimum that can be done, which more often than not does not happen, as I have experienced with the many other disabilities that I also have in addition to my mutant status. Sorry. And this is quite personal to me because throughout my entire life, I've also been told comments from loved ones and doctors and friends and random strangers and everyone in between, things like, I shouldn't be allowed to have kids because I have so many health problems, including this genetic difference, and why don't I just get gene therapy? Would I even choose this? Like, all of these ideas to just fix and cure myself, when there is honestly no simple fix. Remember, if I get genetically modified with gene therapy, I'm still a mutant, because then I'm a GMO, which I would not be allowed in Germany, funny enough. Because no human GMOs. So I have faced disability discrimination in every single facet of my life. However, my job as an artist working in tech is also to imagine what kind of future could look like and how that could happen. And the greatest irony is the future is one of the most inaccessible places to disabled people. Because disabled people are not supposed to exist in the future. This is the general consensus we often see in sci-fi movies. Disabled people have become superhuman. They have a prosthetic arm that also shoots lasers for some reason, and they genetically engineer themselves to go beyond the capacities of what we think of as human. And this is something that disability scholars Alan Kafer has identified as this ableist failure of an imagination, that we cannot imagine a future in which disabled, or really a reality in which disabled people are desired and valued for who they are without these cures and treatments and enhancements. And so this has become what I called as how to undoom the narrative is kind of my answer to cultivate genetic resistance, because like I'm living a doomed narrative, it seems, if I can't exist in the future. But how do I go about undooming this narrative exactly? And so this is where my artwork self-care has emerged. I don't think I can ever be cured of my mutant status. I have a 94% chance of getting breast cancer, and the probability kind of starts going up when I turn 30, which will happen in July. So I'm doomed at best to get the exact same treatment filled with graphic and brutal violence as my mother, which I'll talk about in a second, and also her mother and her mother's mother. And I'm honestly cannot and will not be able to save myself from this fate. There's really no way out of it besides going through it. And so I did what any mature adult does when they can't be part of a solution. I've decided to become part of the problem. And by resisting this narrative of this hero, or this narrative of that simply accepting femininity or prosthesis or all these things will make me a good survivor and well-behaved with my doctors, I've decided to just become this giant problem instead. And how do I do this? So instead of waiting for the cancer to kill it or to kill me, I'm going to care for the cancer. Which is what you see me doing now in this image. I'm feeding cancer cells that have the exact same genetic mutation that I have in this specially designed chest binder that I've made. And I'm going to take responsibilities for its needs and its desires and play out this whole struggle that it has with my own needs and desires. And throughout doing this project in multiple countries, I'm going to fail at this. I've lost the cancer in the mail. I've killed it. I've contaminated it. I've lost the incubator in countries for some reason that it is housed in. There's been lots of different back and forths, and I get all sad and emotional, and my friends get all confused, and my mother gets really disgusted with me because she's like, why would you ever want to kill for the cancer that tried to kill me? It's become quite an interesting, contentious point within my family discussions as well. But in the context of the exhibition, because I can't wear it all the time, I built a little closet incubator for it, and the cancer usually lives out in this exhibition alongside 2 different video works and a number of portraits. The first video work being the fact that I know that I only represent one fraction of this narrative. Again, we talked about multiple subjectivities and mutants. My mother is another one involved, and she was very lovely to let me guilt her into being in my art, where I interview her on the impact of cancer on her and her experience of this, and also her experience giving me this mutation, which she was a great sport, where she told me all these horrific things that happened to her, such as her surgeons made her breast bigger than what she wanted, and she only got reconstruction to please my father, to which I respond horrified. And the dialogue, I think, really paints this sort of honest depiction that disease narratives don't fit one standard. There isn't one right way to be sick, or to be a sick person, or to face a disease. And my mother calls me out a number of times on this. There's no moral high ground to take, really. We're both wrong and we're both right. And she struggles with my own gender identity as I'm non-binary, and I keep trying to assert with her. And then I struggle to understand her perspective as well, how she feels being a cancer survivor when I'm just like lurking around waiting to get it. And in response, I ended up adding, and additionally last year with Art Laboratory Berlin, another video work where I write this letter to my mother, responding to all these different things and describing cancer as this inherited creature that we have haunting our family. I admit to a lot of the failings that I have as a child to care for my mother, because we often don't think about children caring for their mother, but when your parent gets sick when you're a kid, that's kind of what you gotta do. And also her failings to care for me as my mother. because at the end of the day, I think we all have mommy issues that we don't necessarily like to talk about. And I put them out all for display in the gallery without showing my mom first. I let the gallery decide whether or not I was going to send it to her, which my mother knew that that was happening, much to her dismay. And the people at the gallery had mixed reviews, but in the end I did send it to her, and my mother's first thing was like, I'm so glad you finally admitted that you disappeared when you were 15 when I had cancer. And I was like, yeah, I was 15, I didn't want to be around, I think that's excusable. But she's like, I'm just so glad you finally admitted it publicly for everyone. So I guess there's a win there. But yeah, these are the starts of me cultivating genetic resistance, and I think it's an ongoing process. I don't think there's one right way to do anything, but thank you so much for your time and attention.